It's emergency.
Oh, hello. My partner left this morning at 8:30 to take my two children to school, and the dog went with her because we take the dog for a walk.
Right, okay.
I was getting concerned because she hadn't returned home by 9:30. She's usually back by 9:30, so...
Good evening. Detectives searching for missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley, have found a body in the River Wyre, about a mile from where she was last seen. The discovery came after a sighting by two members of the public. Lancashire police say that no formal identification has yet been carried out, but Nicola's family is being kept informed. For more than 3 weeks, the whole community at St Michael's on Wyre has been desperate for news, and this is the update they will have been dreading.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. It's been almost a year since Nicola Bulley's disappearance and death, and the legacy of that case remains that most on social media still think she was a victim of foul play, just as we saw in the Jay Slater case, the Kylie Rodney case, and to some extent now with the Bayesian yacht. For me, the Nicola Bulley case was a shocking reminder of just how out of control true crime has become, and what's truly disturbing is how out of touch with reality the average person seems to be, thanks in large part to social media. Social media has become a fascinating, if frightening, bellwether revealing the average state of mind, and what we see is a zeitgeist prone to fear, highly susceptible to shock value, and very easy to manipulate. Although I think many of us are aware of this idea of competing realities on social media, I don't think it's verbalized very often, and I don't think when it is verbalized it's done effectively or in a complete, comprehensive or meaningful way. Well, that is what I'm going to try to do in this analysis. BBC One's Search for Nicola Bulley, which has just come out, this documentary I think provides an analogy, in a sense, for a search for ourselves and a search for where society and social media is headed. The Bulley case for me is a milestone in the long process of unraveling that we're seeing taking place online, but in a very real sense, it's a mark on a psychological measuring stick that's revealing our collective and individual unraveling as well, in terms of when it comes to reality and how certain sectors of the population are becoming worse and worse at dealing with it. So I want you to think about that, think about your own consumption of it, think about this idea of thinking about the media coverage of itself as we conduct this review of the media narrative within the story of the search for Nicola Bulley. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding my work in terms of this area meaningful, useful, insightful, important, intelligent, any of those things, please consider hitting the thanks button. If you've never hit the thanks button, well, this is your chance. And let's get started.
I thought she must have got chatting to somebody. I've been trying to ring her since about 10:30. No reply. And then the school's just rung me to say that they've just found the dog. Somebody's found the dog, and my partner's put her phone down on a bench and the dog lead, and she's nowhere to be seen.
This is a significant development in the search for Nicola Bulley, and one that may give her family the answers they've been desperately waiting more than 3 weeks for now. Earlier this morning, Lancashire police were called here after reportedly being informed of a body in the river by two dog walkers passing by, and this is where officers uncovered it just a few hours later.
Right, so let's start with a review of the media narrative. And let me just ask you, how many channels do you know that after the fact go back and look at the chronological evolution of the narrative through a sort of critical thinking lens? Like, how did the story evolve? Was it evolving the right way, or do we just let it run amok every single time? Or do we think about the media, think about how the media how the whole system works. We're often inside the forest, looking at the trees, but how often do we look from the outside in? And isn't it something we need to do more often? And it is difficult to know where to start our review, given the colossal dimensions of the fake news monster, just given the size of information around any high-profile case. Where do you start? Which thread do you start to pull on? Because there's just also so much nonsense out there, and once you get onto that hamster wheel running on gaslight, it quickly becomes disorienting. So you've also got to know how to kind of keep your wits about you in going into this area of distorted reality. So it probably makes sense to keep it simple and straightforward. And so let's deal with one publication, one that I generally respect, and have a look at just a small handful of vastly contrasting stories on Nicola Bulley from just this single publication. So it starts February 11, 2023. Police too quick to declare Nicola Bulley was in the river, expert says. Now, we see in The Guardian's coverage a photo of Nicola Bulley's partner, Paul Ansell, consulting with a quote-unquote expert. This expert told him and told the media that Nicola wasn't in the water and she was likely a victim of foul play. Now, it's important to put this into context. This was 2 weeks into the 3-week search for Bulley. The expert, who was one of the searchers, decided that if he couldn't find Nicola in the river, well, that meant she wasn't in the river. And because he couldn't find her and no one knew where she was at that point, well, that vacuum could only be explained by foul play. Thanks to this expert, Ansell said that he believed 100% that Nicola wasn't in the river. His words were that he was 100% convinced that she was not in the river. And apparently so did The Guardian, who repeated all of this. But there was a less shocking alternative to the foul play theory, and it was one that I kept hammering on during the search, which was simply, what strategy was necessary in terms of this investigation? What did they need to do? And I kept hammering on quite a simple strategy.
Try harder.
It is quite interesting that ultimately the investigators and the searchers never found Nicola. It was members of the public who kind of stumbled on her, right? The expert also tried to convince the cops to abandon their search in the river and to explore other leads. Clearly, he believed he had better insight into the case than the actual investigators, and Ansell had begun to drink the Kool-Aid too. It goes without saying that social media gobbled this up. They were delighted with this development because it meant they too also knew better than the investigators. And do you remember what the investigators said? And how they said it, and how and why they felt they needed to say it. Pressure was piling onto the cops. 1 week went by, then another week. There was no news. And ultimately, the cops explained why they didn't believe in the foul play theory. They explained that Nicola had vulnerabilities. And I thought it was interesting that the investigators knew where that path led, whereas her partner, who had the same knowledge, seemed to think it led to foul play. Maybe that's because he was desperate to cling to hope, but it wasn't logical or rational, and it turned out not to be realistic either. Amazingly, after there was an information vacuum filled with conspiracies and claptrap, people were outraged and appalled when the truth of Nicola's mental health was revealed. This was particularly revolting, how the public's appetite for fake news was almost infinite, compared to a minimal threshold. Basically, a tyrannical intolerance for the actual truth of Nicola's condition. In other words, for the reality of the situation. Just think about the psychological hypocrisy there. We have a boundless appetite for conspiracies, no matter how disturbing or unhinged, that perhaps Nicola had been murdered. But if you dare to go into the area of her own mental health, now you have crossed a line. Less than 2 weeks after The Guardian broadcast the expert theory that Nicola wasn't in the river, well, she was found in the river. 23rd February 2023. She's not in the river. Diving expert in Nicola Bulley case under the spotlight. And obviously it's the same publication that had said, that had repeated that she wasn't in the river, was now basically accusing the person who had told them that. Several months later, and following the autopsy results and the inquest, additional perspective emerged. 21st November 2023. Diver in Nicola Bulley search caused false alarm to family, report says. Yes, and also to the media. Police tell review into investigation that X made statements at odds with theirs, causing confusion among the public. How often do you have sideline investigators making statements at odds with the official investigation? And how often does the official investigation turn out to be authentic and going in the right direction? Today we see The Guardian taking the high ground, which is always easy to do in hindsight. 27 September 2024, online sleuthing about Nicola Bulley became a monster, partner says. Search prompted weeks of speculation and multiple conspiracy theories on social media. Well, yes, also in the mainstream media. Experts say conspiracy theories have become much more common in public discourse since the coronavirus, when speculation on a range of issues from the origins of the virus to vaccine safety became rife. Now, one thing you won't notice in The Guardian's final review of the case is them evaluating or acknowledging their own contribution to the fake news colossus, along with the way they enabled the foul play narrative. Now, you might say, that's rich coming from you. You also covered the case and you also, quote unquote, entertained the foul play theory. Actually, I didn't. You can go back through my playlist and check. There was a moment very early on when we had very little information, when it was clear that something serious had happened to Nicola, and there was very little information besides that, just that she was missing, she was still missing. And then foul play was clearly one possibility among several. But I remember very clearly disputing and dismissing the expert who thought that she was never in the river to begin with, and his theory that her phone was a decoy. I also remember another expert who subsequently hoped to contribute to the Jay Slater case, undermining the Bulley investigation, lambasting the cops in the media, and casting what I felt, and I still feel, were dubious aspersions about what he felt didn't happen to Nicola. So what are we dealing with here? We are dealing with, so often, the blind leading the blind. I've covered high-profile stories in true crime for over a decade, and I've seen the pattern repeat itself almost without exception. Almost every high-profile case, the same thing happens. It starts with some sort of information vacuum. Then some expert or blowhard steps forward. He enters the narrative. He tells everyone that he's kind of got this exclusive knowledge in terms of some kind of exclusive insight. He's really got the Midas touch, and that his expertise gives him absolute magical insight into the case. He then sends the case completely off track, and by the time the investigation or trial comes full circle, the circus has moved on elsewhere. And let me ask you, how many creators who covered Nicola Bulley when it was the biggest show in town are covering it now, today? Where are they now? What are they covering right now? Those creators that you followed when they covered the Nicola Bulley case, where are they now? Now let's deal with the MO for high-profile stories. MO stands for money, by the way, and that's in terms of social media. And there's an easy way to make money and a hard way. The easy way is to use sensation and shock value. And the easiest way to find sensational and shocking stories when there's a demand for news during an information vacuum is to make shit up. This is why there was such a receptive audience to the fake Titan submersible transcript. In the Gabby Petito case, fake news took Brian Laundrie through a phase of being a serial killer because two other women were murdered at the same time. Believe it or not, there was also rumors, ridiculous rumors of serial killers in terms of the Nicola Bulley case as well. Fake news had a field day with the Kylie Rodney case, with 2 channels with around 6 million followers between them cumulatively, that basically led virtually everyone covering true crime down the same fake news rabbit hole. And if you, one of the people who say, yes, I actually think Kylie Rodney was murdered, you're one of the people that was misled in that case. I want to encourage you right now to go back to those channels that covered Nicola Bulley when it was high profile. How many are covering it right now? When the whole hard, cold, unvarnished, unsensational truth has come out. When do they cover that part? And much of it is critical of their coverage. What are they covering right now? And so it goes on like a snake eating itself. The hard way to cover true crime is by sticking to the facts, telling the truth, being anchored in evidence, and being authentic. But let's face it, who really cares about authenticity these days? Do most people care about authenticity, or do most people care about being entertained? What does that really tell you? Do people really care about reality, or do people just care about feeling the way they want to feel about reality? People who want to be told what they want to hear about reality. Incidentally, it's been shown that being authentic online is good for mental health, while being inauthentic isn't, kind of like the real world. So if you're following an inauthentic channel, by the way, it's not good for your mental health, no matter how good it feels at the time. So let's go to the next question. Is social media reality? I mean, is society social media? Is social media society? And now we come to the crux of it. How does our relationship with social media, and let's face it, social media has taken over much of our lives, much of our thoughts are kind of preoccupied with social media. Certainly much of our time is gobbled up through social media. How has that affected our relationship with reality and with the real world? How has it changed our thinking? Well, I can tell you now it definitely has. And it has done so fundamentally and foundationally. Are we becoming better people thanks to social media? Or are we becoming more paranoid, anxious, sensationalized, and ineffective with dealing with reality? Are we getting worse and worse at dealing with subtlety? And I think this raises a very important and critical question, and a question I want you to ask yourself right now and answer. Do you prefer the real world, or do you prefer the matrix that tells you what you want to hear about reality? Do you prefer the real world, or do you prefer to know and believe what you want to believe?
The Matrix isn't real.
I disagree, Trinity. I think the Matrix can be more real than this world.
If you remember, this was a truly terrifying, horrifying, and disturbing moment in the movie The Matrix, where basically fiction trumped fact and fiction trumped reality, and basically fiction killed the real characters in the story. And we've just seen something similar to that, fiction trumping fact, in the whole Southport riots. Remember that? I do think it's a silly argument to say that social media isn't real, because for some, for many, perhaps even for most, social media is increasingly becoming their reality. But what if you can't tell the difference between the real world and the dream world? And what if some people are taking advantage of that inability, that lack of discernment?
You know, I know this steak doesn't exist. I know that when I put it in my mouth, the Matrix is telling my brain that it is juicy and delicious.
In a very real sense, this is exactly what social media does. The food that it is putting into your mind is juicy and delicious. It's just not real. Now, a sane, intelligent, conscientious person would care if something juicy and delicious isn't real. I mean, you care if something's real or not, don't you?
You know what I realize? Ignorance is bliss.
Is ignorance bliss? Have you looked around at what is happening in the world right now? Have you watched the news recently? Is ignorance bliss? Are we heading into a more blissful world, do you think? And if we carry on with this appetite for shock value and sensation and a lack of critical thinking and a lack of going back and examining how we made mistakes covering certain cases, where do you think we are headed collectively, all of us, at the end of the day? Sleepwalking uncritically, dumbly into the future and into collective catastrophe. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.